the brilliance of the Copernican revolution, or of the revelations of the cosmos coming from the Hubble telescope, the landing of men on the moon. I mean, all these things, these are extraordinary achievements, and there's a kind of luminous power, dynamism, and even admirability to this civilization. And yet, what a shadow it has created. What suffering has been undergone by other peoples, other cultures, by people within this civilization, by other forms of life, by the earth community, by the human soul. And how can we explain the magnitude of this shadow that has been cast by this light? And this brings us to two paradigms of history that can be seen as very powerful polar opposites in understanding human history, and particularly the history of the modern mind and the evolution of consciousness. And one paradigm is one that essentially is one of in which the human being is seen as having moved through and continuing to move through from an earlier stage and state of relative ignorance and suffering and constraint to an ever brighter modern future that is characterized by ever greater knowledge, power, and freedom and well-being. And that this has been made possible by the systematic development of human reason and reaches its crucial emergence in at the time of the scientific and democratic revolutions. And it is a vision of kind of ever onward and upward emancipation and empowerment. By contrast, the other paradigm of history, this other myth, if we use the word myth in not as like just like a delusion, but a way of understanding the deeper archetypal principles at work in a given phenomenon, is just about the opposite of the myth of progress. And this is one that looks at that same story and it sees it as being an essentially tragic fall from an original state of primal unity between the human being and nature and the spiritual dimension of life. And that this fall, this division, this fragmentation has brought about a ruinous devastation of indigenous cultures, of the natural environment, and even of the human soul, which has experienced itself as being ever more isolated and impoverished, existentially alienated. And that the climax of this development is and the nadir is our own time of ecological catastrophe, which is a direct consequence of the privileging of a certain narrow form of human reason and human hubris as exploitatively deployed against a world that it sees as being an object. Two very powerful visions. I think that is. I think that it is, in fact, part of there's the potential. There's two potentials in our time, basically. One is a catastrophic destabilization and collapse, or an initiatory transformation. And what you're pointing to there is the latter. I think we're in a race between initiation and catastrophe, to play on H.G. Wells's sentence about we're in a race between education and catastrophe. Well, yes, if we include education as if we redefine it as including an initiation. And an initiation involves a separation from the tribal community, from the mothers, from the previous sense of self and reality, and putting of consciousness through a crisis of meaning, a state of profound suffering, a state of alienation, a collapse of the old identity, and an encounter with mortality. And out of that comes a connecting with the deeper archetypal sources of meaning and purpose that inform life and death, from which can emerge an initiate, an adult out of the adolescent consciousness, someone who is capable of carrying the spiritual and material future of the community. And we don't have initiations in our that are adequately profound and sacramental in our society. They're emerging in pockets or re-emerging, but by and large, our society, our civilization is uninitiated, and therefore it's basically being run by a highly adolescent consciousness that is not taking in 7 generations from now. It's not taking in the whole. It's looking at the immediate quarterly report, profit report, and that's taking place in a context of the disenchanted world, cosmos. To fill this out, there's a fourth. What I've been describing here is a descent in which down here, instead of having this sense of kind of this powerful solar anthropos who is the summum bonum in the cosmos of conscious intelligence. God is dead. Man is now capitalized very often, in the self-reflections of the and post-enlightenment culture. And but what happens after this point, after you get the consequences of the Copernican revolution and Darwin and Freud and so forth, you have a descent of the self. This was a powerful ascent forged on a sense of the divine, transcendent self. And with the destruction of the metaphysical world, the death of God, and then the recognition that the Earth is just a planet moving around one star amongst billions and billions of stars in a galaxy that's just one galaxy amongst billions. And you have Darwin's recognition that the human species is just one species that's ephemeral. It's not the divine special creation of all time. You have Freud, who sees the sequence and says, psychoanalysis is the third of the great wounding blows to man's megalomania and narcissism, as it recognizes that the conscious self, the rational ego, is not master of its own house. It's just a recent epiphenomenon out of a larger, powerful unconscious. And and you have Kafka and Beckett and Virginia Woolf and Sartre and Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir and so forth, who are all carrying this kind of descent, this deconstruction of the old self, and it's going down. And going down into where the self, you can't imagine, this is the underworld, so you can situate that there's a little speck of dust down here, and that's the human self in this huge cosmic void of meaning. And instead of this radiant sense of we're going to project our intelligent power and meaning purposes out into the world, the meaninglessness of the cosmos is imploding onto the self that now is experiencing itself as being just a meme machine, just a genetic flawed experiment, just a cipher in mass society, just a marketing target. This is an ego death. And it's just what tends to happen in initiatory transformations. And what I think is going on right now, I'm collapsing a tremendous amount of more complicated discussion into a short presentation given our time limits. But you get with something like Jung's, let's just take Jung's breakthrough into his understanding of, first, of an archetypal unconscious that is shared by all human beings. So that starts to break the human self in its individual isolation into a connection with a larger collective soul reality. And he starts recovering a spiritual dimension of the human psyche. But at the same time, he has this, it is located within the bounded crucible of the human subject. And it's only as time, gradually, as he has these many experiences of synchronicities, of meaningful parallels between what's going on inside either himself or his patients and external events that could not have been caused by the inner event, but perfectly meaningfully parallel it. He begins to get a sense that the archetypal unconscious is not simply located inside the cranium, but is informing all of nature, which now becomes the sacred circle within which the individuation or initiation process is taking place. And so, in a sense, meanings start to, like raindrops, or start to appear in this vast cosmic void. It's kind of like, you know, many of you have seen that film Pleasantville, where the black and white just starts to be penetrated by little bursts of color that intimates something more. In a way, synchronicities represent that intimation that something's going on here that shouldn't be going on if we're living in a perfectly random universe.